Good evening, or good morning, or anywhere else in between. Folks, friends, community, partners of Flexa, AMP, and the greater crypto community. Thanks everyone for joining us here. I am Tyler. As many of you might know, I recognize many of the images here, avatars, people participating in this. This is so cool to be able to chat with you guys. There has been so much going on in the crypto world, as you guys are very well familiar. More importantly, we've got our 25 days of Flexa, which has kept the entire team and other folks intensely busy. So we are at the wire, but there's just so much incredibly awesome stuff that we're working on that we'll be shipping not only this year, but man, early next year. Even trying to put it all in 25 days is almost impossible. It feels like we have like 25 years worth of stuff that we're working on that'll be out, and man, humbling to see all the support and just what we've done and now all the traction as this all comes together. Super exciting. So and with that, can't even thank the community and the team more. What we've just been putting together, and even in setting up the spaces here, I have an intensely long list of questions that folks have been asking. So I am going to jump into those. Literally just the conversations of these are always really fun. For those of you that know me, I can probably ramble on and talk about things for hours, if not days or weeks. It's, you know, that's good fortune of what we're doing here, and that I really enjoy this. I have so much passion for it. So the conversation part is amazing, and that's the most fun. We're gonna get Kwon on here soon as well. So one of my friends, and then obviously working on one of these intensely exciting projects, Terra. I'm sure many of know, and then the L1 now that they put together, one of the top market caps in the world, which is super exciting. But so much we'll be able to talk about in the discussion there. But before even starting that off, because there were so many questions, we love doing this. We want to share as much information we can. If it's something I can ever help information or my perspective, you know, this is really evolving. You know, as you can see, so many of the folks, this is a really community-driven effort. But if I can help with some other insights or share information, you know, always, that's something, you know, we always want to do as much as we can. So I've got this huge list. I'm just going to go through all of these. I'm going to talk kind of completely off the cuff. These are very honest opinions, you know, what we feel about things, what we've got going on, and, you know, my thoughts on things. So I'm just going to go down the list and answer it pretty much as you guys have asked. So thanks again to you and our team, Eli and Chris. Thank you so much for putting this list together in compiling through Twitter, Discord, otherwise. This is a great set of questions that we're going to run through. And I would even say to people that want to know more, have other questions, and working with us, helping with us, anything throughout the community, Discord is great. We're available there. You can ask us questions. We can, you know, and growing the community even bigger, that is literally a place where we are. There's lots of dialogue. We have other amazing platforms too. You know, I see the AMP Facebook group, Green Guys, right? So shout out to them. You know, they've been helping a lot with content and, you know, really growing the community in multiple ways. So yeah, thanks for everyone here. I'm gonna go through these, and as more questions come up, you can either add them here, again, Discord, submit them to us. Like, this is by far the last time, you know, we're ever gonna do this. We might have been, there's been rumors internally of even getting Trevor to jump on to one of these and help even more information and share more information on the merchant and payment side. So that's even something we've got in the works here, I think. So there'll be a lot more great opportunities for us to share and have open dialogues and chat with everyone around what's going on. So with no more further ado, and not necessarily in any particular order, but here we go. Will staking rewards continue to be paid from the development fund in 2022? So that's a question from Twitter. The short answer is yes. basically the supply of AMP. AMP is a fixed supply token, and it will be most effective the more distributed it is. The greater the community is, the larger the community, the more stakers there are. And so it's not going to be a situation like other projects, maybe without naming names, where a treasury or a corporate entity will be holding a majority of the tokens for a very, very, very long time. That doesn't make AMP better. It doesn't make Flexa better. It becomes better by being more and more decentralized, having more of these tokens spread out across, millions and millions of users across the world. So we absolutely want to be contributing additional staking rewards to even further reward and decentralize the network. And we haven't, right now, even on the AMP side of things, we have not done a formal study by any means of the total AMP holders. But as you guys know, when you just look at something like Etherscan, it'll show you the amount of holders, but that doesn't necessarily count the staking contract itself and how many individual stakers we have, or even potentially exchanges or other centralized, custody solutions where people have AMP that aren't necessarily manifesting on chain. We are over right now, by our current estimates, over 3 million individual AMP holders. So there are literally more than 3 million people now that have tokens, that have AMP tokens, that are staking AMP tokens, that are using the network, and that is just so incredibly thrilling to see. So we want to reward that further. We want to make that, how do we get that to 100 million and beyond? But so far, it's just been super exciting seeing that. Absolutely want to support the network and continue, distributing tokens in that way, especially for the earliest adopters, the ones that are really bootstrapping this and getting this going, and especially as we add a lot more wallets. So as more wallets will be coming on the network pretty soon, potentially. Don't want to get too much in the whole announcements of announcements, but as I mentioned, we've been very busy, and so busy this month, busy in the upcoming new year. It makes a lot of sense for us in growing this network. There's going to be an absolute ton of wallets that we'll need lots of collateral for, and lots of folks participating in the network for that. So very exciting. Another question from Twitter, how would an increase in the underlying price of AMP impact the transaction cost? I'm assuming that question is really about the cost of a payment transaction. It really wouldn't. So there really shouldn't be any real correlation between AMP itself as the collateral and then the payment mechanism through Flexa or anything else. There really shouldn't be too much connected there. So as AMP becomes more valuable, or if AMP were to become more valuable, it really wouldn't impact any of the transaction costs throughout the network, especially as more and more, so that is the answer. It won't affect the price of the transactions, but as you guys have also seen, it's getting more exciting with other layer ones, and so their speed and other transaction costs, which we've seen. We've added a lot of these assets even to Flexa now over the past couple of weeks, which has been exciting. And then now the layer twos on Ethereum, that as that becomes more and more prominent, it is a absolute certainty that Flexa and our staking contracts will be using the relevant layer twos to make this, much more affordable, cheap, easy for everyone. That's from day one, we've looked at this at how many people can be using this network and staking tokens in any amount. And if you've read some of our earlier posts through Flexa, we mentioned how we even set a lower cap on collateralizing the network of how much AMP is required to actually stake a wallet from a cold start. And it was something around, at the time, like $100 worth of tokens. So, we could set that to other amounts, because it really is all about getting more and more people participating, across the world and doing all this. So the cost of staking, unstaking, reassigning collateral, choosing wallets, all of that entire process we will absolutely aim to make that as cheap as possible. But one thing I also comment on is, everyone in crypto needs the solution tomorrow, where that's not always the right approach. Building scalable and safe software takes a very long time, and you want to put in the right time and effort to make sure it is safe for everyone to use and not lose user funds and not have a broken system. So rather than just abandoning a network and moving to the next shiny thing or something that promises scale that may or may not be true, we're taking a very pragmatic approach, and we're working with quite a few teams and making sure it's just done the right way, the safe way, that'll yield the results that we're looking for over the next 5-10 years, and not just over the next 5 or 10 weeks. So let's see, we've got is there any way for Flexa to reward staking for length staked? So the short answer is yeah, absolutely, we could do that. And it's something that the team and others we've thought about quite a bit. We really never came across something that across all variables would really make sense in terms of you start getting into penalties for unstaking then in terms of your reward and how it would get recalculated, and there could be odd arbitrage implications that we might not have anticipated. So other networks or people using AMP as collateral could absolutely do longer staking durations or a more advanced algorithm or calculations for that. It's something that Flexa can do. We have not tested or figured out ways where that might make sense. But if you have some ideas, other economic models, otherwise, please do share them in Discord particularly. That's stuff that we would love to read, understand further, have dialogue towards. We now have the forum available on for AMP governance. Those are the sort of things we can talk about. So if there are other opportunities, better ideas, we're very, very open to approaching, what is the model the community, or more importantly, the users are going to embrace and what makes the most sense. So there's another question here. Currently in the Spalding and Gemini Pay apps, we have to first select the store. In the near future, do you envision having a universal QR code generator that would work indiscriminately at any store to eliminate that step? That one's probably the easiest one. I would just say yes. That's really the vision. We want this to be as absolutely easy as possible for all merchants, in-store, online, all apps, all assets. So that is absolutely a part of the roadmap. It's extremely challenging, as you can imagine, given all the various hardware, the software, the setup, how this all works behind the scenes is probably 10 times more complicated, even in the most complicated way that I could explain it. So it's tricky, or I should say it's very hard, but that's what we do, and that's what everyone in this group is looking to do, and we will work hard, and it is part of the goal, and I think that we can get there. So that'll be a really cool, really great experience, and this is what starts to get mainstream. That's how this all starts to come together, is when you can truly get to that stage where it really is that easy. Question here, why would AMP be still necessary to collateralize transactions, even though other layer ones like Avalanche and layer twos like Loopring that have high TPS or transactions per second? That is one of my favorite questions. And I've already probably taken such a long time answering some of the other ones, so I don't want to spend the next hour or two talking around this specific question, which I absolutely love. One short answer would be the white paper itself on the technical side addresses this fairly thoroughly, of why collateralizing all different types of, in these instances, proof of stake networks is still required. A medium answer is there are all sorts of edge cases in these networks around how a transaction can be confirmed finally. How does it actually become final? In maybe 99% of cases in a standard transaction that is a genuine transaction, you can reach finality very, very quickly on certain networks. But in reality, through these edge cases, and particularly attack vectors, which is what a fraudster or someone faking a payment or cheating a payment would do. There are many, many opportunities to create longer duration around achieving finality, which is why I like to talk about it in terms of economic finality. When does a chain or an asset become transferred and final, where an attacker does not have economic incentive to try to rewrite that transaction or create a fraudulent transaction against that one? So that's even a question now that we're looking to address a little bit more in depth as well. So some research and information, a very, very thorough sort of write-up and discussion around this will be coming. So this is personally one of my favorite topics. So on this one, we'll put a little bit of a pin in it and expect lots more commentary on this. And I'll also be clear, it's not negative commentary by any sense. So I am not saying at all that Avalanche, Loopring, or these others are falsely advertising something like that. That's not the point. The point is you can have, achieve finality like they're discussing in many ways, in most situations, exactly as advertised, and that works very well. But in our very niche world of using payments for retail, there are lots of edge cases that will surface that make these networks and these crypto networks not necessarily ideal because of those features. And that's what AMP and Flexa look to solve, to make them absolutely ideal by providing a collateral system to now allow them to be perfectly usable in these situations. But lots more information on that one. A much more in-depth answer is required, but for now I will move on to some of the others. Another question here of why would banks be incentivized to adopt Flexa if this means losing their interchange payment revenue? That's also another really great question. The short answer there again is they'll earn the same amount of money, if not more, by not using the other middleman that they're essentially tied to. So the interchange payment itself, yes, would be transferred or wouldn't exist now, and that you now have payments being made directly. But when you look at the way these systems are architected currently, the banks, the customers are already of the bank. So when you use your Visa card or your MasterCard, and you get your bill in the mail or you go online, you're not actually paying Visa. If you look at it, you're actually paying the bank. So you are the bank's customer. What Visa has done is create the acceptance platform for you to now use. The bank will now have their customers pay the bank, but they have to go through this legacy system and they have to go through this gatekeeping system and basically pay rent to this system. And when you look at even banks, JP Morgan is, I think, I'd have to look up again, but I think it's around, what, $500 billion market cap company, something in that neighborhood. And then you have something like Visa, which is maybe a $450 billion market cap company. And it's a percentage which is, 70 to 80% the market cap of the bank whose customers they are and who's actually routing all the funds, and they're the one with the banking infrastructure. But then you have a messaging service that has just connected to a lot of other hardware and software that's worth 80% the largest bank in the world, which seems sort of insane when you look at it from that perspective and that lens. So you can see how valuable just this little acceptance or this messaging layer has become. So by removing that, the banks will be able to make just as much money as ever before because the bank is the customers are already theirs. So and this is also, to be clear, we're not saying that we're looking to eliminate credit. Credit can exactly exist the way that it is. You just don't need a card anymore. You don't need a card running over a legacy network. A bank could now offer credit to you as a customer in the exact same terms as before, and they could have that as a relationship just as before, except now you're paying directly through them and through Flexa potentially, rather than through a older system that is prone to fraud and is very expensive and very slow. So the banks actually will stand to be in better situation than they have been before. And I should also mention there's a proxy for this, and that if you look at some instances in Europe where within the Eurozone, there's been quite a few countries that have agreed to basically allow intrabank payments to be made through a specialized protocol that is not reversible and ends up being very cheap. One in particular that you can find more information about is in the Netherlands. It's called Ideal, I-D-E-A-L, and it's been wildly successful to where it's making up something like 70%, 70% of all e-commerce transactions within the Netherlands, which is amazing. And those transactions cost about 10 cents. So 10 cents all in to make a transaction. And guess what? The people behind all that are the banks. And so the banks are issuing their accounts through a card, unfortunately, but can be used as a virtual card number. And they're all the bank's clients now making digital payments and across the entire country. And these payments are costing 10 cents a piece. And the banks are the ones that set this up, and I can guarantee you they're making just as much money, if not more, through the products and services that they offer through this system, which doesn't rely on these older technologies. And so there's even this phenomenal proxy now of what this can look like. So I guess all of us were really looking to the Netherlands of that they figured this out. So there are our aspiration. It's not a coincidence. I'm even looking down at the app here, and I see floating ratio, who I think has disclosed is from the Netherlands. That is not a coincidence, and that one of the people that's talking the most about how payments work and what this can look like happens to be living in one of the best places that has solved this a lot better than others, and is seeing firsthand what this utopian world can start to look like. So having firsthand of seeing payments getting made there. Why can the rest of the world not work like this? And why can people from the US not bring our tokens and our apps and go spend them all over the world and spend them at places like an Albert Heijn in Amsterdam? That should happen. And I think it's inevitable that will happen. And we will be in a pretty exciting place when that gets rolled out. So let's see, we have will the Spalding app ever support AMP, the token itself, as a token that could be spent at retailers? So yes, we'd like that to happen. We've been a little slow at doing it, primarily because we really, really want to emphasize what AMP is used for and its sole utility as a collateral token. And so that is paramount in how we've discussed this and what its use is and how people will understand and start using this token more universally. So that was the first component of why we wouldn't have rolled something out like that right away. And then the second part is going back to some of the earlier conversation I was mentioning around how security is so vital and how your approach and really looking and covering all your bases and looking at the edge cases if you have a token that can now be usable and spendable, that would essentially be sold, and then also the underlying asset as the collateral itself, there is a potential, again, these are edge cases or really unknown unknowns, of you want to just be really careful you're not going to disrupt any of the economic systems. I shouldn't even say economic systems, create any vulnerabilities of someone really trying to hijack or cause malicious activity on the network of spending too quickly on certain wallets, impacting markets, trying to get some sort of Oracle vulnerability or an exploit, which we see all the time. So for us, we think that we'd be generally straightforward to enable this, but because it's so incredibly critical and we take this so seriously, we want all of this to really work the way that we know it can. We're going to do the diligence. We're going to put together, the math and all the reasoning, and likely even work with some other external sources to even validate what we've been talking about, to say, okay, now we're ready. And so we're looking to do this relatively soon. So this is not 2 years out, but it's also not 2 weeks out. But it'll be saying, all right, AMP can now be usable exactly the same as other assets, but here's a more robust analysis of showing how and why, and that there's no risk. There's no other risk to the network. We've really put in the diligence to make sure this is solid, and you can see these sorts of things. This is what differentiates projects like Compound. If you look at Compound and you look at how they approach collateral factors within their network, and how there's all this debate of, you see things like wrapped Bitcoin, where that's one of the most liquid tokens out there, and Bitcoin itself. has, you know, something like a 65% collateral factor. And that's because you have this community of folks that are going through this and saying, all right, what is the worst case scenario around this? Like, what if this option happened 3 years ago and it got replicated here? And what if this, you know, Uniswap, its front end goes down and then this happens? And what are like all these like spikes in the system and vulnerabilities that have happened, right? And you add them all together and you say, all right, now what is our comfort with you know, Compound functioning as desired and not losing the protocol money and having all of the users, you know, get the experience and the product that they're looking for. And they do, and that's why they arrive at those numbers, and they constantly reassess them. And there's a lot of just prudence and diligence into those systems, and you can see all the dialogue and see how engaged the community is. And so that's exactly the sort of system we want to replicate across Flexa and AMP, and really having that level of dedication and care and understanding of just longevity of what the system looks like. So that was a really long answer for that question, but a very honest answer of how we're approaching this and making sure it's done right, and can then also be very successful. So how will the Flexa network be used in expanding the metaverse? Oh man, sitting here at this point in time, the way that crypto grows so quickly and the metaverse itself, I feel like a year could go by and I won't even recognize what it can look like and how big, what the impacts could actually be. The easy answer is that as the metaverse becomes ubiquitous, more and more digital payments are going to be required. And so buying digital assets with digital money is going to be a pretty unfathomably large market. And buying digital assets with digital money is where the highest fraud in the entire world is. And so something like Flexa empowering that would be a really, really great solution. So from a very, very straightforward standpoint, we would imagine playing a very huge role just within literally being a backbone of allowing this all to work and grow, and people being able to use the things that they can buy and participate in these economies. And so that's the short answer there. And then surely with all these other assets that are out there and just the metaverse in general, there's going to be a lot of other tokens. There's earning tokens. There's NFTs that people are earning now, like in-game NFTs, using those. And I mean, that's money, right? So in a lot of these communities, if, you know, you could use something like, let's say, Loot, right? That's been an exciting project that, took over the entire internet for about 2 days recently. Imagine now using your loot bags or other products similar to that and buying things or using, pudgy penguins or things like that to buy things, right, as NFTs that are assets to you. So for us, it's whatever assets you find valuable, your digital money, if that's money, like we want to be able to facilitate that getting spent. And so I think that's also a really interesting angle around the metaverse itself. So we are really looking forward to the growth of that and these digital economies and how we think Flexa will play a massive role within all of that. All right, let's see. Do you expect to accept Fiat in the future over Flexa and possibly replace the current system monopoly? So then there was a follow-up saying something like a Flexa credit debit card that acts like Visa but with cheaper fees than Visa. So the answer there is like 100% this is going to happen, and allowing, so in line with just what I was saying, it's digital money, any digital assets. So fiat representations of that, through your bank account or an app that has dollar value, euro value, whatever that is in a digital format, that fits the bill perfectly. So that's, I'd say, one of the largest aspirations we have is enabling fiat payments through your checking account, savings account, whatever app you might have, to just pay. That's all it really is. So it's a denomination in your app. It's a digital dollar, whatever that is, whether it's a central bank currency or it's a PayPal currency or it's a Bank of America currency or whatever that is. We want that to be usable 100%. I will say there's no way we would issue a card. So a Flexa credit or debit card will never be in the cards. That's kind of a funny pun. because that's just not what it is. It's all digital. We want this to be, through your apps, a totally new digital network that does not require those things, but it would function like that. But now it's just a digital system rather than the physical cards that can be exploited in those ways. But yeah, absolutely. And then this is also where it really ties back to AMP, in that I was mentioning that ideal system within the Netherlands. The rest of the world does not function like that. So even in the United States, it can take 30 to 45 days for an ACH or a dollar bank-to-bank transfer to clear between parties. So if you imagine you have a system now where I want to pay someone or a merchant with my bank account, and this is like what Venmo does. If you look at the terms and conditions of Venmo, you'll see that it explicitly says to merchants, do not accept this as payment. This is why you can't use Venmo to buy things at the store, but you can use it to send money to your friends because you trust your friends. And it's because the way that it's all set up, the way that these payments work, without going into too much of the details, they're reversible, and they can basically, you can create chargebacks on these payments for potentially up to like 45 days. So if you pay a merchant using Venmo, the user could then file a claim on that and potentially reverse the funds. And so that's why in its terms of service it says merchants do not accept this really under any circumstances as payment. So imagine if you could have a system that would now impose maybe certain conditions, and now you could have payments that essentially are floating for, let's say, 45 days. How could that work? Well, what if you had a collateral system where you could basically back those payments for that duration of time, ensuring that the people are not cheating and that the payment is actually good, even though maybe it takes 45 days for it to reach economic finality? Well, that's what AMP and Flexa are. So that's what we've set up. And so that's really the process we're looking to aid. So you can see how we're solving that problem really in real time of what this starts to look like in the future. Let's see here. Oops. And then we've got, I see Joe has also joined, so I'm going to invite him to see if he picks up. And then I will, let's see. I'll see if I can get another question in here. There he is. Can you guys hear that? Looks like, hopefully, Joe. Oh, never mind, I can hear. Is he there? We're getting closer as we use this, our new technology.
I'm here.
All right, excellent. All right, so Joe, I've just been talking about just sort of like Flexa in general. We had a whole bunch of questions just around how Flexa and AMP has been working just as we've been growing. So just no questions, but now I'm here. Now we can get more into the really fun sort of discussion piece. And it's really just around, like, as we've seen the evolution of this digital money and how this has now been growing. We all know a lot about what you guys have done with Chai and how that was just like unbelievably massive. I think that's like the fastest growing private payments company I've seen in crypto. Could you just share with everyone kind of what Chai is, what growth you've seen, what that's looked like, and then kind of what you might be doing beyond that and how it relates to Terra? I mean, that's a big question, but if you could jump with that, start with that, that'd be amazing.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, as a disclaimer, I've sort of diversified into a lot of different topics since a couple of years ago when I was just focused on payments. But to give a little bit of historical background, when Terra first started, our goal was to start a payments network and to acquire a lot of merchants that would transact using our stablecoins. So the idea was that if you could set money in motion, then in that case, you can capture a lot of money at rest. So the things that we tried to do is we built up an e-commerce focused merchant network in Korea, and then we built an e-wallet that would target that network called Chai. So the key differentiator was that we would take from the user either stable coins or fiat. So the on-ramp experience would be similar to what I guess stateside, people are familiar with Plaid, and on the merchant side, we would settle in stablecoin with obviously like things like OTC and fiat off ramp options attached. So we did this in a couple of countries. So we set up a company called MimiPay Mongolia, and Chai grew to sit above about 50 merchants, usually very large e-commerce retailers, generally with GMV of anywhere between 500 million to $5-10 billion in volume. And we had some good success with this. Grew the app to a couple million users. So we acquired a payment gateway called Import, that's doing about like $6-7 billion in transaction volume run rate. So a lot of that was really interesting. And now I think we're going through like a really interesting period where traditional fintech companies are, they've already enabled P2P payments or P2P transactions in stablecoin or in crypto between users, or at least the ability to purchase crypto directly from their main app. And like all of them have plans to expose crypto settlements to the merchant merchant network. So a lot of that has been pretty fascinating.
And then you've also, now through all that in Luna, I think have really put together a pretty ingenious model around UST. And we're obviously seeing the growth not only of Luna, but UST. Can you maybe share a little bit of like how that works, the economic model, and some of the growth you've seen with that particularly?
Yeah, so I mean, I can't take all the credit because I think a lot of that is just like, various different realities playing out in macro. So, what we spent a lot of focus on over the last, I want to say 2 years, is we created, this algorithmic stablecoin called UST. And the idea is that UST, unlike other stablecoins, are fully decentralized. So if you look at Tether, you look at Circle, there is some sort of real world off-chain collateral that is backing the stablecoin instead of Terra, in which case there's no real life collateral, right? Which is counterintuitive. But at the same time, the stability of the stablecoin is managed by various game theoretic incentives that exist on chain, i.e., in the sense that you can always swap out 1 Terra USD into our main staking asset, Luna. And then vice versa, you can mint 1 Terra USD by burning $1 worth of Luna. So this has some interesting characteristics, right? So as crypto has gotten larger and larger, of course, stablecoins are probably the most important product in crypto. There's been increased regulatory appetite to try to censor the issuers of stablecoins like Circle and Tether to be more, shall we say, boomer compliant, right? But more specifically, what I mean by this is that various different types of use cases that a certain regulator or a certain set of people might not be comfortable with are starting to, questions are starting to arise as to whether they should be censored. Now, the problem with this is that this poses an existential threat to not only DeFi, but everything that we've built up on smart contract platforms. Because even if you build a totally fairly governed and extremely decentralized, let's say, lending platform or AMM, or like an NFT exchange or whatever have you, it does not matter if a small set of people can hold hostage the entire stack that's been built on top of centralized stablecoins by limiting or freezing the use cases that's been built up on top of these stablecoins. So in some sense, like there's this famous quote, right? Give me control of a nation's money supply and I care not who makes its laws, right? So, I mean, given all of these recent developments, like the Senate hearing, I think, which was just yesterday in the United States, there's a lot of pronounced preference among builders to choose to build on top of decentralized stablecoins instead of centralized ones. And I think Terra USD was a big beneficiary of that because explicitly it doesn't have any exposure to centralized assets that can be held hostage by incumbents or regulators anywhere. So that's been like an interesting characteristic. And on top of that, we've seen sort of the explosion of lots of different things like a DeFi ecosystem, not only on the Terra blockchain, but on places like Solana, Ethereum, and recently Polygon, pick up Terra UST as a main quoting asset across various different, stable swaps, DEXs, and other DeFi protocols, which has been really interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with this intense need for having a real decentralized stablecoin with the solid mechanics behind it. I think we're all familiar with DAI and what that had been created, how that got set up, and now there's as it's evolved, right, expanding its collateral, not only using things. I think it was a point where it was like 50% collateralized by USDC or something like that, if I remember. So it's like it's really cutting at the ethos of I think what they set out to do, which again, that's not a criticism on my part, just mainly pointing out how it has evolved and what it looks like now. Like, did you guys look a lot at what Maker had done and see the good or bad or any inspiration there? Like, did you try to build something? I'm kind of getting at is did you use some of the learnings there, what you saw in building UST to make it stronger from a decentralization standpoint?
Yeah, sure. And I just want to, say 100%, I think MakerDAO is one of the most innovative things that happened in crypto and DeFi in general.
Yeah, I would agree.
And I think it's been, it was sort of one of the key ingredients of the initial DeFi revolution, right? So I think they should get credit where credit is due. But I guess the only thing that I am concerned about is that, well, two things actually. With the MakerDAO model, I think they can get to a state where they are decentralized, but the problem is that model doesn't scale very well to accommodate lots of different possibilities for stablecoin demand. So because there needs to be over collateralization to create DAI, unless you use USDC, it means that the cost of minting $1 worth of DAI stablecoin is greater than $1. So this only really makes sense when people are wanting to take out leverage of whatever the collateral is, let's say Ether, or let's say BAT, or whatever have you. In which case, even if there's a greater demand for DAI stablecoin, it can't scale unless that there is sufficient or proportional demand to take out leverage on the collateral asset. So it's more of a leverage or liquidity protocol rather than a stablecoin protocol from that sense. So one of the reasons why USDC was added as a collateral pair with very low collateralization cost is to address precisely this issue. But the trade-off there is that it leads to more centralization. So I think the protocol itself is in an interesting transitionary time where they're trying to figure out what their North Star is. And, we'll wish them all the best.
Yeah, no, I think you described that really well, especially for how it ended up getting used in the real world applications of how that protocol ultimately was used just within the community itself. Let's see, what do I want to ask around that? So you mentioned, and there was even an interview I think you did recently where you're talking a little bit around the centralization of Terra, Terraform Labs, and how you participate still within this, decentralized economy to where you really still don't have control, especially as everyone's really talking about some of the legal pieces around all this. And Flexa is very similar in that, Flexa itself is a centralized entity and will remain that way, working with merchants, setting up its business deals, parameters, maintaining, some certain software, but then AMP itself is inherently decentralized, and how these collateral contracts work and how that part of the system works. How do you see the centralized component, like the thing that you work for and your team? How does that participate? How are you still helping grow the network, or how does that symbiosis sort of work from your perspective?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I think the way to think about it is the network starts to decentralize with lots of participants when the opportunity is large enough that that there's a way to be successful without joining the initial genesis team. And I think there's lots of great examples of this happening in crypto. So in the case of the Terra network, there's dozens of companies that jumped into building on top of the Terra ecosystem, and there are some companies that either manage or got to a tune of like more than $1 billion at this point. Whereas, so like from that sense that there's plenty of opportunity for new people to join in, become a core contributor to the network, and then become really successful like in the same ecosystem. So in the case of Ethereum, I think the Ethereum Foundation is definitely not the most successful agent of whatever happened in the Ethereum boom. You can think of plenty of other examples that made a lot more money than the initial Ethereum folks. I mean, Vitalik definitely isn't like the richest person or the most successful person like in the Ethereum ecosystem, depending on which vector that you're looking at. I think in the case of Flexa, like decentralization obviously would be very easy to predict in a case where you guys built out like a great case of a payments network in the United States. And then in that case, like people could take that same model and then by using or accumulating the AMP token, start to expand that same model that is localized in different markets, let's say. It could be China, or it could be Southeast Asia, it could be Europe. In that case, that would be yeah, so there'd be commensurately large opportunity for them to build out such a network, except it's significantly de-risked because you guys have done it before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly some of the components. And as we've looked a lot at like the legal part, like how has the use been from your perspective of especially Terra or UST? Is that really universally used? Do you see it getting used in different jurisdictions or for certain use cases beyond the typical trading? Is it used across like ARB and other platforms? Like, where do you see it getting used a lot?
Sure. So unfortunately for us, the trading use case hasn't been able to exist because as of today, only 3 exchanges support UST. So that's OKX, KuCoin, Bitfinex. There might be a couple of others, but not too many so far. And I guess it's on Coinbase, but it's not sufficiently listed on centralized exchanges to justify a liquidity or trading use case. So today, if you look at like the distribution of the use cases for UST, I think it's largely still used in DeFi. So like one of the largest use cases is Anchor protocol, which is a savings protocol whereby if you deposit Terra stablecoins into this, it gives you a 19.5% fixed yield that is powered by staking returns from multiple different POS chains. So the idea is that it's a lending market like Compound or Aave, but the collateral that you post in order to borrow stablecoin is in the form of for general purpose lending markets, like the collateral while sitting in the protocol doesn't really do anything except to get lent out. In the case of Anchor, it's constantly generating POS staking returns, and that can be conferred to users in the form of a stable interest rate. So that's been like one of the primary use cases. There are things like, cross-chain use cases like on Solana, like UST is a pretty liquid stablecoin pool on that ecosystem, which is then picked up by different DeFi developers to build other use cases. MIM to UST pool is the second most liquid stablecoin pool on Curve on Ethereum. And and similar types of cross-chain use cases also exist on, let's say, BSC or Polygon. And the Terra ecosystem today, like independently, it's, I think, the 3rd largest smart contract platform after Ethereum and Binance Smart Chain by TVL. So there's been sort of an explosion of use cases on the Terra blockchain and most of these leverage are built on Terra USD.
Yeah, that's awesome, and how quickly it's also grown too. Like this was, I mean, I feel like this has all happened even like the past 18 months. Like how quickly this is all like really, really all the traction that's getting that we're seeing now. How, given all of that, and like now that Terra is so big, even just by market cap, use, participants, how do you envision that playing with Ethereum? So long term, just scenarios around being another layer one. What are your thoughts on having complementary layer ones? Do you think there's going to be winner take all in certain like niches or certain use cases? How do you see some of that playing out? And you don't have to mention, specific chains if you want to get into that side, but just even there, like kind of philosophically, how do you see some of this coexisting or not, like over the next few years?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So the way that I think about it is, I mean, so obviously this question has lots of layers, right? But uh, as as like a first response, the way that I think about it is like I feel like a different computer is justified for different use cases. So for example, you wouldn't use like a quantum computer to power something that really can work with the Raspberry Pi, right? And similar to that, like sometimes like a very GPU intensive engine might be required for something like Bitcoin mining. Whereas, like a very simple user laptop could be more suitable to, let's say, watch porn or something like that, right? But you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't do it off of like a massive AWS server, right? Unless you're crazy. So I think a different type of, a different set of trade-offs justify different types of use cases, and I think that's what's going to happen to blockchains, right? So I believe that there's going to be multiple different blockchains, each with a slightly different flair of how they do things, or in some cases, like they could serve very similar general purpose use cases. And I think there's opportunity for several of these to coexist at the same time, similar to how there's AWS, there's GCP, and there's iOS and Android coexisting. Because and I think that competition sort of galvanizes even existing networks to do different things. And I think it's a little bit different from, let's say, like an analogy of a TCP/IP protocol. And I think that's because there's commercial interests involved, and whenever there are commercial interests involved, then I think competition is good and free markets are good. In the interest of Terra, so Terra is largely two things, right? Number one, it's a decentralized stablecoin. And number two, it's a layer one protocol. The goal is for Terra USD to become one of the most liquid stablecoins across all the different smart contract platforms: Ethereum, Solana, Polygon, Avalanche, and whatever new blockchain might happen to pop up. And so I think that's the primary goal. So it doesn't really matter to us, like, who wins or what the composition of layer ones look like in the future. We just want to be, like the decentralized money that helps the ecosystems on top flourish.
I like that. That's the one of the goals we're aiming for sure. I guess to that point too, with UST, how do other like currencies factor into either the mechanism of Luna UST, so the stability mechanism and also the functionality? Like, do you think Terra will ultimately have all of the other sort of central bank currencies? Will there be the euro version and others? Is it harder to do the complexity, the technical components of that? Will there be 10,000 different assets, similarly created on Terra, do you think?
Yeah. So I think it's going to be like a long tail growth kind of thing. So in the beginning, when crypto was still small, everybody was comfortable quoting most things in Bitcoin. And then after that, like once you had sort of the early adopters come in, they needed stable coins to quote, because that's whatever they were using. Like the dollar was what they were using to denominate their funds, or denominate PNL and things like that. So the USD stablecoin was more. And I think as crypto starts to seep more into everyday lives of retail users across different countries, these people are going to demand that there exist stablecoins that are pegged to their native like their the local jurisdictions. And the reason for that is because, like, if you're in Indonesia, you don't denominate stability, you don't gauge stability in terms of like the US dollar. That's still, pretty volatile in their eyes, right? Or like if you live in like Japan, like you wouldn't do that. So I feel like as crypto seeps more and more into retail, there's going to be, versions of Terra that's, let's say Terra Japanese yen or Terra, um, Philippine peso and things like that. And those things are going to pick up traction. But I don't think we're quite there yet, in the sense that lots of people that are using crypto have already acclimated themselves and made themselves comfortable to using dollar pegged stablecoins. But I think over the next 3 years or so, that's going to change.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Do you think it would, if these tokens were added, would it affect the core dynamics of UST and Luna? Like, is that something that strengthens it? Is there any concern around it? Just when you get into the real details of how it's implemented.
Yeah, so we already support 21 stablecoins. So there's Terra USD, Terra KRW, Terra MNT, Terra SGD, Terra CNH, so on and so forth. And then basically how it works is at any given time, users can swap any of the Terra stablecoins against Luna for whatever their sort of notional value is. So you can swap in 1 Terra USD for $1 worth of Luna. You can swap in 1 Terra KRW for 1 KRW worth of Luna, and then so on and so forth for each of the currencies. And yeah, essentially like validators on the Terra network, they have FX feeds that are coming into their nodes all the time. And then basically they translate that to a Luna 2 stablecoin exchange rate. And then they vote on that every 15 seconds or so to get at the real rate.
That sounds like as Flexa is turning on some of our other markets, we should maybe look to you guys on some of our FX components. That seems to be like a perfect system of how you could do this, and then do it in a decentralized way, and then also get the correct the pricing right, which is really really important. Getting the accurate, like, unbiased pricing.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe that's going to be a pretty massive opportunity for us to be able to use that. Let's see. I also have one more question for you, regarding so Luna and basically how it underpins just Terra. In full disclosure, I have Luna, and I've had Luna in the past now for years. I think at this point, I was able to use another exchange, and I actually staked Luna through the exchange itself. So I thought that was great, and that just as an individual user, I could basically use their validator service, and it was very easy, to where no other technical knowledge is required. And for me being able to be able to participate and stake and earn rewards in the network, how do you guys view that in terms of, as you're talking about more of the decentralization piece and being so critical? Are there things that you guys have done to make Luna, I guess I would say, more stakeable or easier to stake for an individual user without necessarily going through a trusted party? Like, what the infrastructure might look like for an individual to run, a validator? Is that, not feasible? Is it, how have you kind of thought about that? Because I know there's obviously all within, ETH 2.0 and what that has looked like. There's been so much discussion. Obviously, it means a lot even to our communities because, staking AMP on the network and the process for what all that looks like. Have you guys thought about that, or have you seen numbers? Like, does it matter as much as, how does that just evolution look like? Is there anything on the roadmap to allow it to be further decentralized? Are you seeing it that way? Is there anything concerning? Is it, look healthy the way that you've seen it? And I don't know. I haven't looked recently, so that is by all means the most neutral question possible. Just really like to hear your thoughts on what you've seen and what it will look like.
Yeah, so for context, a lot of proof of stake networks have the problem that, exchanges like Binance or, let's say Huobi or Kraken, they would turn on these staking operations. So they would run a validator on behalf of the users. And then when users want to stake, they don't need to leave the exchange experience where they do most of their trading to be able to stake to that said proof of stake network. So that sounds great. But the problem is that often leads to network centralization. So for example, for Cosmos, for a while, Binance was like the largest validator. For Tezos, Coinbase was the largest. So these two situations where like exchanges just amass too much voting power, and that could lead to problems like weakening network security, weakening the validity of governance proposals and things like that. For Terra, we've actually had the opposite problem. So the reason why we were able to avoid exchanges amassing too much power is that in the beginning, in the early days of the network, we've had very little pickup from centralized exchanges. So for most of its history, Luna wasn't listed in most exchanges in the world. So thereby, like a different set of people was able to accumulate Luna instead of, let's say, like whales on very large exchanges. So today, I think out of the centralized staking operations, like Binance is probably the largest, and they're like number 17 at this time. So haven't been able to pick up too much stake. But we sort of have an opposite problem where we still do have centralization, but these are sort of like community validators, right? So for example, the largest validator today is this thing called Orion Money, which is one of the DeFi protocols that's built on top of Terra. So a lot of these community validators that are running protocols are bribing people to stake to their validator by promising airdrops to delegators. So this is obviously attractive, right? Like if you're going to get the same staking reward and on top you're going to receive the airdrop, then that's very enticing. So you're leading to these wars between different protocols to launch their own validator, promise airdrops, and then people speculate on how large those bribes are, and then that leads to a lot of delegation churn. That's still centralization, even though I think it's better than validators like exchanges amassing too much power. But yeah, I'm kind of hoping that it's going to settle down over time after people get sort of tired of all the airdrops that are happening.
Yeah, no, it's sort of the blessing and the curse, right? The other thing that I think a lot of protocols often don't realize is that just even how you go about decentralization, and that if you go too quickly and airdrop tokens even to users in very, very high percentages early on, you'll find that most of those users don't care, and they end up in the wrong people's hands, and then now governance can be stalled, or you're just having a lot of not long-term thinkers participating or not participating. So I think that's something that's often overlooked, especially as a lot of people, at least in the US, try to get, we're going to look to the SEC or the regulatory components of decentralizing everything so where we don't have the liability, where it's like, well, you got to be, look at that. What is the plan? What does that mean to you guys? How are you, really distributing these tokens out in a meaningful way? With some sort of strategy, right? So I at least see a lot of that. I don't think it's so short term. When you mention a lot of this around the airdrops, like that's just immediately where I kind of am thinking towards. So anyway, we've already gone over time. So like, thanks, man, for doing this. This is cool. We should look to do it again sometime as we get more and more going here with Flexa and Terra. I'm just excited to hopefully see you in person again one of these days. It feels like 20 years ago since we actually, had that one lunch in Berlin, I think it was. And just being able to meet up and see each other now with all this COVID stuff. I can't wait for this to keep moving on and getting to build stuff together. But there's going to be so many, hopefully everyone listening too, like, feedback on both sides of, I think there's going to be so many massive opportunities with Terra and Flexa growing together, and what this will look like in the future, globally, and having a decentralized stablecoin as Do's really been, really been working hard at putting this together is so vital to what we're doing. So this is awesome. So any other questions you guys have in Discord, Twitter, otherwise, love to do something similar. Thanks everyone for joining. Do, anything else you wanna say in closing here?
No, this was great. Thanks for having me, Tyler.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll do this again soon. And yeah, thanks again, Do. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.